For years, you have probably heard that HIIT is the gold standard for fat burning. Get your heart rate up, keep it high, sweat hard, and the pounds just melt away. But what if I told you that for a significant portion of the population, especially adults over 40, the standard HIIT advice might actually be working against your goals?
Wait, working against you? I thought HIIT was basically the best thing you could do for your heart and your waistline combined.
It is one of the most effective tools in the exercise toolbox when used correctly. But the problem is, a lot of the HIIT advice out there comes from the fitness industry, not from exercise physiology research. And the research tells a much more nuanced story, especially when we look at what happens to your cardiovascular system, your joints, and your recovery capacity as you age.
Okay, now I really want to hear this. I am 65 years old. I have tried HIIT classes, and I will be honest, sometimes I walk out of them feeling amazing, and sometimes I feel like I have been hit by a truck. And I never knew whether that feeling meant I had a great workout or I should not have done it.
That is exactly the question we are going to answer today. And I promise you, by the end of this episode, you're going to know exactly how to design a workout that gives you all the metabolic, cardiovascular, and longevity benefits of HIIT without the joint pain and without the burnout. Welcome to Longevity Lab. I am Claire.
And I'm Robert. And Claire, before we even get into the research, I have to ask you, what actually is HIIT? Because I think people use the term to mean everything from a 30-second sprint on a treadmill to a full hour of burpees and jump squats.
That is actually a really important distinction to make. HIIT stands for high intensity interval training, and the key word there is interval. The structure is short bursts of very intense effort, typically between 20 seconds and 4 minutes, followed by a recovery period of equal or longer duration. The ratio varies, but the core principle is that you are pushing your cardiovascular system to near maximum capacity during the work interval, and then allowing it to recover before you go again.
So it is not just working out really hard for a long time. It is the specific pattern of work and rest.
Exactly. And that pattern is what triggers the physiological adaptations we are going to talk about today. Improvements in VO2 max, mitochondrial colonial density, insulin sensitivity, and even something called cardiac remodeling, which is the heart's ability to pump blood more efficiently. But here is where the fitness industry has gone wrong. They have taken this very precise training methodology and turned it into a one-size-fits-all prescription.
I feel like that is the story of every health trend. But let's start with the science. What does HIIT actually do to your body at a cellular level, and why should somebody my age care about it?
Great question. Let us start with the single most important marker of longevity that HIIT improves, your VO2 max.
VO2 max. I've heard that term 1,000 times, but I couldn't tell you what it actually means beyond fitness number.
It is a measure of how efficiently your body uses oxygen during exercise. Think of it as the horsepower of your cardiovascular engine. More specifically, it is the maximum amount of oxygen your body can utilize during intense exercise, measured in milliliters per kilogram of body weight per minute. And here is the longevity connection that I think is genuinely startling. A massive body of research, including a landmark study published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology in 2018, found that VO2 max is actually one of the strongest predictors of all-cause mortality, stronger than smoking, stronger than high blood pressure, stronger than cholesterol levels.
Stronger than smoking? That does not sound right. Smoking is one of the worst things you can do for your health.
I know, it sounds counterintuitive, but let me explain what the research actually shows. The study followed over 120,000 participants and found that a low VO2 max was associated with a higher risk of early death than any other traditional risk factor they measured. Now, does that mean VO2 max is more dangerous than smoking? No, because correlation is not causation. What it means is that VO2 max is a remarkably sensitive marker of your overall cardiovascular and metabolic health. It captures the cumulative effect of your genetics, your physical activity, your diet, your sleep, everything that affects your heart and your blood vessels. A low VO2 max is like a check engine light for your body.
Okay, that makes more sense. So it is not that low VO2 max causes death, the way smoking causes lung cancer. It is that low VO2 max indicates that something is not working well in your cardiovascular system.
Exactly right. And here is the empowering part. VO2 max is highly trainable. You can improve it at any age. There is a well known study from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center that showed adults in their 60s and 70s who underwent a 1 year exercise program improved their VO2 max by 18 to 20%. That is a significant clinically meaningful improvement.
So heat is the best way to improve VO2 max?
It is one of the most time efficient ways. And this is where the evidence gets really interesting. A 2016 meta analysis published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine compared HIIT with moderate intensity continuous training, that is, your steady state jogging or cycling, and found that HIIT produced greater improvements in VO2 max across all age groups. But the key finding was that the advantage of HIIT over moderate exercise was actually larger in older adults.
So the older you are, the more you benefit from heat.
That is what the data suggests, yes. And the mechanism is fascinating. As we age, our mitochondria, the energy producing structures inside our cells, become less efficient and less numerous. This decline in mitochondrial function is one of the hallmark features of biological aging. Heat appears to stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis, which is the creation of new mitochondria more effectively than steady state exercise.
So heat is like sending a signal to your cells saying, we need more energy factories. Build them now.
That is a perfect analogy. The intense effort creates a metabolic stress that triggers the cells to adapt by building more and better mitochondria. And this adaptation is particularly important for aging muscles and brains because both are heavily dependent on mitochondrial function. There was a fascinating study from the Mayo Clinic in 2017 that looked at the effects of different exercise modalities on aging cells. They had three groups. One did HIIT, one did resistance training, and one did a combination of both. The HIIT group showed the greatest improvements in mitochondrial function and also showed something called reversal of age-related gene expression. In other words, the exercise was essentially turning back the clock at a molecular level.
That is incredible. But here is where I start to get skeptical. If heat is so beneficial, why do I sometimes feel terrible after doing it? And why do I see so many stories about people getting injured in heat classes?
Because the dose makes the poison. And this is the critical point that the fitness industry often ignores. The HIIT protocols used in the research studies, the ones that produce those amazing results, are very different from what you typically experience in a studio class or what you see on YouTube.
What do you mean?
The research protocols are carefully supervised. They include proper warm ups and cool downs, and this is crucial. They are individualized to each participant's fitness level. The work intervals are not go as hard as you can until you collapse. They are work at 85 to 95% of your maximum heart rate, which is calculated based on a stress test or a validated formula, and stop the work interval when you reach that intensity.
So the study participants were not doing burpees until they vomited?
No, and the rest intervals are also carefully prescribed. Most of the studies that show positive outcomes use a work to rest ratio of 1 to 2 or even 1 to 3. So if you sprint for 30 seconds, you rest for 60 to 90 seconds. That is not what most HIIT classes look like. They tend to minimize rest periods to keep the intensity high and the calorie burn elevated.
And that is a problem because
Because without adequate recovery, you are no longer doing true HIIT. You are doing what exercise physiologists call high volume interval training or metabolic conditioning. And while that can be effective for some goals, it comes with significantly higher injury risk, particularly for the knees, hips, and lower back. A 2019 study in the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy found that the injury rate in HIIT classes was approximately 3 to 4 injuries per 1,000 hours of participation. That is comparable to weightlifting and higher than running.
that is not a negligible risk.
It is not, and the risk increases with age. Because as we get older, our tendons and ligaments become less elastic, our joint cartilage thins, and our recovery capacity diminishes. So, the same workout that a 25-year-old can recover from in 24 hours might take a 55-year-old 3 to 4 days to recover from fully.
So the advice to just push through the discomfort is actually harmful for older adults?
It can be, yes. And this brings us to one of the most important concepts I want you to take away from this episode: the difference between high intensity and high impact.
I think I understand the difference, but explain it to me.
High intensity refers to the cardiovascular demand, how hard your heart and lungs are working. High impact refers to the mechanical stress on your joints. What happens when your feet hit the ground or when you land from a jump? A burpee is both high intensity and high impact. But a spin bike sprint at maximum effort is very high intensity and very low impact. A brisk uphill walk on a treadmill at an incline of 12 to 15% at a pace where you cannot hold a conversation. That is moderate intensity and low impact.
So I can get the cardiovascular benefits of HIIT without jumping and landing and pounding my joints.
Absolutely, and this is the core of what I want everyone over 40 to understand. The research on HIIT and longevity does not require you to do jumping jacks, box jumps, or burpees. The cardiovascular and mitochondrial benefits come from the intensity, the heart rate response, not from the specific movement pattern.
Okay, let me ask you something that I think a lot of our listeners are wondering. I have heard that HIIT can actually be dangerous for people with heart conditions. Is that true?
It is a legitimate concern, and the research does support caution. A 2021 study published in the journal Circulation looked at the acute cardiovascular responses to HIIT in adults with and without known heart disease. They found that during very high intensity intervals, above 90% of maximum heart rate, there is a transient increase in the risk of arrhythmias, particularly in individuals with underlying heart conditions.
So if you have a heart condition, you should avoid HIIT entirely?
Not necessarily, but you definitely need to approach it differently. And this is where personalized medical guidance becomes essential. If you have diagnosed cardiovascular disease, hypertension, or any history of heart issues, you should absolutely have a conversation with your doctor before starting any high intensity exercise program. And ideally, you would work with a qualified exercise physiologist or physical therapist who can design a program that respects your individual limitations.
That makes sense. And let me guess, most HIIT classes do not include a medical screening or a personalized intensity prescription.
They do not. And that is the gap between the research and the fitness industry. The research studies screen their participants carefully. A 2017 systematic review in sports medicine found that out of 87 HIT studies that showed positive outcomes, over 90% excluded participants with known cardiovascular disease, uncontrolled hypertension, or orthopedic limitations. So the results apply to a relatively healthy population, not necessarily to the person walking into a HIIT class with undiagnosed high blood pressure or an old knee injury.
So the fitness industry is essentially saying, do what the studies show works, without telling people that the studies excluded most of the people who actually walk into a HIIT class.
That is a very accurate summary. And I want to be clear, I am not saying people should not do HIIT. I am saying they should do it intelligently with the right modifications and with an understanding of their own health status.
So let's talk about the modifications. What does a safe, evidence-based HIIT protocol look like for someone over 45?
I am glad you asked because this is where the practical takeaway lives. Let me give you a specific protocol that is based on the research and is designed to maximize cardiovascular and mitochondrial benefits while minimizing injury risks.
I am taking notes.
First, choose a low impact modality. The research consistently shows that cycling, whether on a stationary bike or an outdoor bike, and elliptical training produce the same VO2 max improvements as running based HIIT with significantly lower injury rates. A 2018 study in the Journal of Science and Medicine in Sport directly compared cycling HIIT with running HIIT and found identical improvements in VO2 max, but the running group had a 5 times higher rate of overuse injuries.
5 times higher. That is a massive difference.
It is. So, if you are over 40 and you have any history of knee, hip, or lower back issues, the evidence clearly supports choosing cycling, elliptical, swimming, or rowing as your HIIT modality.
Okay, so cycling is my go-to. Now, what about the intervals themselves?
This is the second critical component. The protocol that has the strongest evidence base for safety and effectiveness in adults over 40 is called the Norwegian 4-4-4 protocol. It was developed by researchers at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology and has been studied extensively in both healthy adults and cardiac rehabilitation patients.
Tell me about it.
The protocol is straightforward. You warm up for 10 minutes at a very easy pace. Then you do 4 intervals of 4 minutes each at 85 to 95% of your maximum heart rate. Between each interval, you have 3 minutes of active recovery, which means you keep moving but at a very easy pace around 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. After the 4 intervals, you cool down for 5 minutes.
So the total workout is about 35 minutes, with only 16 minutes of actual high-intensity work.
Exactly. And this is the finding that surprised me most when I first came across it. The total time spent at high intensity in the research protocols that show the best outcomes is typically between 10 and 20 minutes per session, not 30 minutes, not 45 minutes. And yet most HIIT classes try to keep you at high intensity for 25 to 30 minutes or more.
So more is not better. It is actually worse.
In this case, yes, and the mechanism is straightforward. When you exceed about 20 minutes of total high-intensity work in a single session, your body's stress response, specifically the cortisol response, becomes disproportionate. You start to accumulate more muscle damage than your body can repair efficiently, and your immune system becomes temporarily suppressed. This is called the open window period, where you are actually more susceptible to infections for several hours after a very intense workout.
So the go hard or go home mentality is literally making people sick.
It can, yes. And let me give you one more data point that really drives this home. A 2020 study published in the Journal of Applied Physiology looked at the immune response to different volumes of heat. They compared a group that did 4 intervals of 4 minutes, the Norwegian protocol, with a group that did 8 intervals of 4 minutes. The group that did double the volume had significantly higher cortisol levels, more markers of muscle damage, and a greater drop in immune function that lasted for almost 24 hours. And what was the difference in VO2 max improvement? Almost identical.
So the group that worked twice as hard got the same benefit with a worse recovery and a suppressed immune system.
That is exactly what the data shows. And this is one of the most important lessons I want every listener to take away. In exercise science, the relationship between dose and response is not linear. Beyond a certain point, more work does not mean more benefit, it means more stress with diminishing returns.
I have to say, this is completely changing how I think about my workouts. I have been trying to push harder and harder, thinking that if some hit is good, more hit must be better, and the science says the opposite.
And you are not alone in thinking that. The fitness industry has basically built its entire marketing strategy around the idea that more effort equals more results. But the longevity research tells a different story. Long term health is not about maximum effort, it is about consistent, appropriate effort over decades. Sustainable exercise wins the race.
So let me ask you about something specific. I do a lot of walking, about 45 minutes a day most days. Should I replace some of my walking with HIIT?
That is a great question, and the answer depends on your goals. If your goal is purely longevity, living a long, healthy life with a lower risk of chronic disease, then the research actually shows that moderate intensity exercise like brisk walking may be more important than HIIT. A 2019 study in JAMA Internal Medicine found that adults who did 150 to 300 minutes per week of moderate intensity exercise had a 20 to 30% lower risk of all-cause mortality. And the benefits plateaued at about 300 minutes per week.
So walking is not just better than nothing. It is actually one of the best things you can do for longevity.
The evidence supports that, yes. But here is where it gets interesting. The same study found that adding even a small amount of vigorous activity, about 75 minutes per week, provided additional mortality risk reduction beyond what moderate exercise alone achieved. So the optimal approach seems to be maintain a strong foundation of moderate exercise, that is your daily walking, and then add 1 to 2 sessions of HIIT per week to get the mitochondrial, cardiovascular, and metabolic benefits that moderate exercise does not fully provide.
So walking is the foundation and HIIT is the supplement, not the other way around.
That is a perfect way to think about it. And the dose matters even for the HIIT component. The research suggests that 2 sessions per week, each lasting 20 to 30 minutes total, including warm up and cool down, is the sweet spot for adults over 40. 3 sessions per week may provide additional benefit for some people, but the risk of overtraining and injury starts to increase significantly beyond 2 sessions.
What about the people who really love HIIT? The ones who feel amazing after a hard workout? Should they just do what feels good?
I would say do what feels good, but measure what matters. There is a concept in exercise physiology called heart rate variability, or HRV, which is a measure of how well your nervous system is recovering from stress. A drop in HRV is a sign that your body is not recovering adequately between workouts. There are now consumer devices that measure HRV reasonably accurately, watches like the Apple Watch or Whoop Band, and they can give you objective feedback about whether you are ready for another high intensity session.
So instead of saying, I feel good, I will do HIIT today, you should check your HRV and see if your body actually is ready.
Exactly. And this is particularly important for older adults because our recovery capacity declines with age. The same workout that a younger person recovers from in one day might require 2 or even 3 days of recovery for someone in their 60s. If you ignore that and keep pushing, you accumulate what exercise scientists call training stress, and that chronic stress can actually accelerate biological aging rather than slowing it down.
That is the opposite of what most people think. Most people think exercise is always good, and more exercise is always better.
It is a common belief and an understandable one. But the science of exercise is the science of stress management. Exercise is a controlled stress that triggers adaptation. But if the stress exceeds your capacity to adapt, the adaptation stops and the damage begins. This is called the overreaching zone, and if you stay in it long enough, it becomes overtraining syndrome.
Okay, so let me try to summarize what I have learned so far and see if I have it right. HEAT is effective for improving VO2 max and mitochondrial function, which are both linked to longevity. But the fitness industry has exaggerated both the benefits and the safety. The research shows that low-impact modalities like cycling are safer than running or jumping. 2 sessions per week is optimal, not 5. And the work intervals should total no more than 16 to 20 minutes per session. Did I get that right?
You got it perfectly. And I would add one more piece. The warm up for heat is not optional, it is essential. And this is something the research emphasizes that the fitness industry often skips. A proper warm up for heat should be at least 10 minutes and should include dynamic stretching and light cardio that gradually increases your heart rate. The goal is to prepare your cardiovascular system and your joints for the high intensity effort. Skipping the warm up is one of the strongest predictors of injury in heat, regardless of age.
So the 10-minute warm-up is not just a suggestion, it is a necessity.
It is. And the same goes for the cool down. A 5-minute cool down with light movement and static stretching helps reduce the post exercise drop in blood pressure and helps clear metabolic waste products from your muscles.
I want to ask about one more thing before we wrap up. What about the people who just cannot do HEAT? People with chronic joint pain or heart conditions or who are very deconditioned. Is there a version of this that works for them?
Yes, and this is where the evidence is actually quite encouraging. There is a modified version called low impact HIIT or interval based moderate exercise. The principle is the same. You alternate periods of higher effort with periods of lower effort, but the intensity is lower. Instead of working at 85 to 95% of your maximum heart rate, you work at 70 to 80%. And instead of 4-minute intervals, you use 2-minute intervals with 2 minutes of recovery.
So it is basically a jog walk interval on a flat surface?
Exactly. Or you can do it on a bike, an elliptical, or even in a pool. The key is the rhythm. Higher effort for 2 minutes, lower effort for 2 minutes, repeated 6 to 8 times. The total time at the higher effort is still 12 to 16 minutes, but the intensity is lower, so the risk is also lower. And a 2019 study published in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology found that this modified approach still produced significant improvements in VO2 max, blood pressure, and insulin sensitivity in adults who were previously sedentary.
So even a gentle version of interval training works better than just steady moderate exercise?
For some outcomes, yes. The variation in intensity seems to be the key. Even small changes in effort during a workout, going from a 5 out of 10 effort to a 7 out of 10 effort, stimulate different physiological pathways than staying at a steady 6 out of 10, so you do not need to be gasping for air to get the benefits of interval training.
That is really empowering. I think a lot of people, including me, have felt like if they are not doing the maximum intensity version, they are not getting the real benefits. And the science says even a gentle version works.
It does. And I think that is the most important message of this entire episode. The best exercise is the one you can do consistently, safely, and with joy. The research on longevity is very clear that adherence over decades matters far more than the intensity of any single workout. A person who walks briskly for 30 minutes every day for 20 years will likely have better health outcomes than a person who does extreme HIIT for 3 months and then gets injured and stops exercising entirely.
So the goal is sustainability, not intensity.
Yes. And I would add, the goal is to build a relationship with exercise that supports your life, not one that drains it. If HIIT makes you feel energized and capable, great. Do it smartly with low impact and adequate recovery. If it makes you feel depleted and achy, there is absolutely no shame in choosing something else. The longevity research supports moderate, consistent activity as the foundation. Everything else is optional.
Claire, I have to say, this episode has genuinely changed how I think about my workouts starting next week. I have been pushing myself harder and harder, thinking that was the path to better health. And I now realize I have been missing the point entirely.
I am really glad to hear that, Robert, and I will be honest with you, I have had that same realization myself. For years, I believed that harder workouts meant better results. It took reading the research to understand that I was overtraining and under-recovering, and that was actually working against my longevity goals.
So, what do you do now?
I do 2 HIIT sessions per week on a stationary bike using the Norwegian 4x4 protocol. I warm up for 10 minutes, do the 4 intervals with proper recovery and cool down. And on the other days, I walk, I do yoga, or I do light resistance training. I feel better, I sleep better, and I have not had a single injury in over 2 years.
That is the kind of real world result I can get behind. So let me ask you for the final takeaway. What is the one thing you want our listeners to remember from this episode?
Here is today's rule. HIIT is a tool, not a lifestyle. Use it like a spice. A little bit adds flavor and benefits, but too much ruins the dish. 2 sessions per week, low impact, proper warm up, and adequate recovery. And never forget that your daily walk is the foundation of your longevity.
That is the rule. HIIT as a spice, walking as the foundation.
If you found this episode helpful, please take a moment to subscribe to Longevity Lab and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing this. We publish a new episode every day, breaking down the science of healthy aging into knowledge you can actually use.
And if you have questions about what we covered today, drop them in the comments. Claire and I read every single one, and your question might inspire our next episode.
Until next time, keep moving, rest well, and trust the evidence. This has been Longevity Lab.
Stay curious, stay healthy, and I will see you in the next episode.